Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Aware, Relaxed, Connected podcast. Join me as we explore approaches and orientations towards cultivating the physical body, the internal landscapes, the mind, and our relationship with reality as a whole. I'm your host, Craig Mallet. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 2. A little bit of a delay on my end getting this one out. I got a kind of clogged nose from hay fever when I was teaching my workshop recently in Melbourne, and Melbourne always smashes me with hay fever. I don't know what's in the air there, but you might hear my voice is still a little bit scratchy just from that. I am fully recovered physically, except for the clogged nose, but I'm hoping that that won't interfere with the recording too much today because I don't want to put it off too much longer. Okay, so on to the topic of today. What I want to talk about is orientation and motivation. The reason why we do these things, why engage in these strange practices, what's it going to do, what's the point? And this is really, I think, at the heart of all of it. And I just want to actually kind of circle around a few rather big topics in this podcast, just to see if I can bring everyone's orientation around at least, or at least make my own orientation clear. You know, everyone else is going to have varying motivations for being in these kind of practices and pursuing them. And part of my orientation is that I think everyone can and will do whatever they want. So, um, yeah, the first place to start is to just unpack the word maybe health or fitness or wellness or whatever kind of word these practices get lumped under, spirituality, this kind of thing, and just try and find an understanding of what that means to you, because I hear people using, let's say, health and fitness or wellness as a word that apparently should mean one thing, but everyone has slightly different definitions of it. So, I know some people who think that to be well and fit means you can run a marathon, run a triathlon, you're pretty strong, you can run really far, you've got good cardio, this kind of performative aspect of it. And that's certainly one valid orientation to have, one lens with which you can look at a person through. But as soon as you shift that lens, things change slightly or very dramatically. So, for example, I was in the movement culture, had a lot to do with the movement culture back in the day, and still, I got a stack of friends still in that world today, and I duck my head in and out of it from time to time. And for those of you listening who don't know about the movement culture, basically, oh man, the timelines aren't going to be so clear, but it was somewhere around like 2010 to 2013, 14. In this period, you had the kind of rise, and it really started probably actually before this with CrossFit, which would have been mid 2000s, if my memory serves me correctly. This idea of being generally prepared across multiple disciplines. So, physical preparation, physical practices that would help you for any and every physical challenge you could go against. So it was, the idea was not that you could just run a marathon and just do some weights and things like that, but also if you went into a ballet class, you'd have the flexibility for that. If you went on into a rock climbing gym, you'd have the strength for that. You'd have the coordination. If you went into a brand new, racket sport or foot sport, you'd have the coordination. You'd have the endurance to be able to do all of those things. And to kind of summarize it, the people said, well, it's movement. It's about being able to move well under any circumstance in any context. And so from this perspective, as soon as this lens comes in, suddenly the person who may be able to run a marathon but is stiff like a board and couldn't sit cross-legged if their life depended on it, isn't really seen as fit and healthy anymore. They're seen as kind of, having not taken care of that aspect of their life, and that if they just trained in a different way, they would then reach this standard of health and fitness. And so that's again another angle from, say, the movement culture. Then I know if you drop from, say, gymnastics world, which is very straight lines and rather stiff in their presentation, and you go to something like the b-boys and the dancers of the world, who are much more fluid, but maybe a little less powerful. They will have their version of what makes a fit dancer, a fit human. The grace becomes an aspect, the musicality becomes an aspect then that they're looking at. So all these different lenses change and shift. And if you go into spiritual communities, especially like lame new age ones, then the standards suddenly of health suddenly become, are your chakras aligned, and do you speak kindly to people, and I don't know what else they do, like do yoga. Can you do yoga in the morning? And so on and so forth. There's a whole bunch of standards that come through that lens, and whatever, you can go into any particular little subculture, subgroup, and they have a different meaning for what health and fitness means. And then you have the people who are like, well, I haven't been to the doctor in a gazillion years, so therefore I must be healthy and fit, even if I can't do all those things. I don't get sick. Um, which is, again, another orientation, another lens that you place over this health and wellness. And then you move into, say, the Chinese medicine lens of looking at things, and the Chinese medicine is really about the circulation and the balance of the channels. Let's say that very broadly, but there's a lot of different sub theories underneath that. But from that perspective, then it doesn't really matter if you haven't gotten sick. In fact, not getting sick might be an indication that your immune system isn't working properly, and viral particles and invasive energies are just coming into your system, setting up camp and staying there. And so even the not getting sick thing doesn't really apply from that angle. And so if you go get a TCM diagnostic, actually, if you feel perfectly healthy and you feel totally fine and you go and get a TCM diagnostic, they will often still find imbalances. They'll often still find issues that are maybe sitting dormant, but can be addressed in with treatment in the long term, and to help prevent issues later down the track. Um, then there's the whole mental health lens, right? The mental health and well-being of a person. A lot of people I know, I've met before, they're high performing. Maybe they're generally healthy, they're not getting too sick in their life. But if you were to lock them up in a room on their own for like a day, they would go completely insane. And we saw this just so prolific in COVID times, that routine, everyone's routine of distractions got completely interrupted. The powers that be decided locking everyone in their home was a really good idea, and people suffered for it. People were now stuck with nothing else to do but to be with themselves, and their relationship with themselves was put on full display. And often it was not so good, and it didn't seem to have any correlation with performance. Lots of high performing people suffered. It didn't have any correlation at all with like things like whether they're completely loaded and can afford all the best trainers, because all the celebrities were going totally mental. And there was just no real correlation, at least that I saw, between any kind of performance level, any kind of wellness thing. Even if people had been dieting and doing all those kind of things, let's say, it didn't help when they were suddenly left to be just with themselves for a long time. I see this thing a lot too in my world. The stuff I teach, often I'll have people come in, they've got whatever history, they've done, told me that they've done 20 years of meditation, and they're obviously physically, capable, they can lift weights and they're flexible and whatever else. And we stand for something like 5 minutes, and it's really like it wrecks them. You can see them, they're cooking, They're kind of, vibrating internally. They're sweating profusely. They're struggling to stay there. And often these people don't come back, or have to spend a lot of time like facing the uncomfortable reality that whatever performance they have, whatever their capacities are, they can't just stand there with themselves for a very short amount of time. And these times I'm talking about, like when you get into the world of the internal cultivation, standing for 5 minutes is nothing. It's not even like a beginner on the mark yet. It's really, it's kind of like the ballpark to be able to stand for at least an hour. Um, and longer than that for people who are more intermediate, shouldn't be a problem. Going up to 90 minutes or 2 hours or things like this. Um, and so I kind of raise that, not to say that that's better or that's worse. It's just that the word health, the word wellness, the word fitness, even the word spirituality doesn't have a set meaning, right? It changes culture to culture, subculture to subculture, person to person, even. And so it can be good to kind of sit down and review what you think is how you'd like to be. What would you consider fit for yourself, well for yourself, healthy for yourself? What do these words actually mean to you? Do they mean that you can run up a mountain without puffing too much? Because I mean, I can't do that well. To be honest, I haven't trained that kind of thing very much. It's not in my interest. I don't care to do it. But for me, that's not super important. I don't really value that as a skill set that I need in my life, as a quality that I need. I have my level of fitness, and I'm very happy with that. But this kind of thing, often people's motivation is, I want to be fit, I want to be healthy, I want to be well, and they haven't really unpacked what that means to them. They just throw these words around with a kind of vague notion that they want to be able to lift weights. And inside that vague notion is that this kind of implication that if I could run really far and if I could lift weights, then and I'm going to jump here to like an underlying assumption that we all have, that if I get good at whatever the lens I'm looking through suggests is good, then my problems will go away. This is a kind of really underlying motivator. A lot of people get into this stuff because they believe if they do, insert getting good at whatever topic they investigating, then their problems will go away. This was huge in the movement culture. It was hugely implicit and often explicit. People would just kind of talk about, if you just train your movement right, your body would be super healthy, your joints bulletproofed, and you just wouldn't have any problems anymore because you could move so well. All of your problems would disappear. And there was this kind of idea that if you moved really well, that it would help your mind and your mental clarity. And there's some level of that going on, but it's really like, I also know plenty, plenty, plenty of high performing athletes whose minds are just a mess. They can't sleep properly, they can't concentrate, whatever, they live off coffee and stuff like this. So it really became apparent for me that this isn't the case. And I want to share a personal story about when that happened for me, because it really shifted my motivation. I didn't realize that my motivation was set up like this. And it took this event to kind of uncover that for me. Um, so it was back in my movement days, and I was training to get a muscle up. And in those days, it was not reasonably common, that skill. These days, every second man and a dog, you go down the park and someone's smashing out sets of 10 muscle ups and stuff like this. And there's tutorials all over YouTube that can find how to build that skill. And those didn't exist back then. So it was much harder to build that skill without the knowledge we have available now. And so I was working towards it, and there was this idea with the muscle up. It was this kind of combination of a pull up and a dip, a pull and a push for the basic strength ideas, that you want to have kind of strong pulling and strong pushing. There was a straight arm component because you started in a hang and you ended in a support. Um, and that if you could do this movement, this magical movement, then it meant, uh, well, at least in my mind, it kind of meant that, okay, once I got that done, then I'd be good. Then I'd kind of be cooking. I'd be ready to go. I'd have achieved something, let's call it worthwhile. And I have this really, really clear memory of the first day I got a muscle up. I got this muscle up, and I was like so stoked that I finally got this skill, and there was this charge in my mind of like, I've got it now. I'm there, I've kind of arrived, so to speak. And then after I finished that session, I walked down to the shops, and suddenly I was just like struck in the face by how little my life had changed as a result of achieving that skill. Nothing changed in my walk to the shop. Nothing changed in the way I spoke to people, in the way I related to things going on. Nothing had really changed in any other aspect of my life except that I could now do a muscle up. And I realized that I had kind of invested a lot of mental weight into that moment. There's some aspect of me had really truly believed that if I got a muscle up, at least some of my problems would go away, at least some of them. And it just didn't happen. Nothing happened except I went for beforehand. I couldn't do a muscle up, and now I could. And these days, I don't train that kind of stuff anymore. And the amount of times I've needed a muscle up in my life to do anything is precisely zero since then. So the only reason for me to train that skill, and I realize some people actually need it in their life, they're performing and whatever else. But for me, for my lifestyle, for the things I do in my life, it would just what completely was unnecessary. And I do not miss that skill at all. And it's the same with handstands. A lot of people training handstands. Or if you can train handstands, if you can stand on your hands and you can do all this extra stuff on your hands, and that changes everything. And for me, it really didn't. The only thing it changed is that I could stand on my hands for a bit. Um, and then life went on. So I really sat down after that moment, and I really wanted to investigate the what was the motivation, or to rephrase, what did I think was going to happen when I achieved that skill? Was there a kind of uh, an idea sitting in my mind somewhere, a belief structure sitting in there, believing that if I got this skill, certain troubles would go away, certain aspects of my life would get better somehow, it would be improved somehow. And I kind of really started to explore that deeply, like what's motivating me to do this stuff, because I realized when I didn't get the magic pill, when the moment didn't arrive that I got this skill and all my problems didn't disappear, my life was still the same troubles, life troubles, the same thing everyone has. Um, when they didn't disappear, it was like, well, why am I training this? Do I even want to be training this if it's not going to magically make all my problems go away? And I really sat with that, and I kind of worked through all the things I was doing, and in a great deal of the situations, the answer was no. Like, I'm just not interested in training this stuff. And the only reason I was training it was because there was some deeply ingrained belief structure in me that if I got good at that stuff, that certain problems would go away, life would get better somehow. And when I saw that wasn't the case, it was really like liberating. I just got to stop doing all this stuff that I didn't really want to be doing, and I started pursuing stuff that I did want to do. Now the issue is that as soon as you get into a topic like spiritual practices like meditation and internal cultivation, then they're even more heavily loaded with this kind of idea that, oh, if you just get good enough at this stuff, all of your problems will go away. And I can safely say that that has never ever been the case in my life. I've never met anyone who has made all their problems go away. That person just doesn't exist. That perfection does not exist at all. Even the most highly accomplished people that I've met, like lots of my old teachers just have the same normal problems that people who don't train this stuff have. They have communication problems with their family. They do things that are maybe by someone else's standards, not quite so moral. They get upset with stuff. Normal human stuff happens to them just as much as it happens to you and I. Perhaps they have some skills in navigating those problems, and that's interesting to note. But even then, it's not the case that it's going to be perfect. And this perfection that we're on the hunt for, I think, is a deeper problem. I think it's a global modern mind, or at least spawned from the Western mind, but now a pattern that's kind of affecting most of the world, I'd say. Any part of the modern first world, at least, that's all hooked up to the internet and all of this stuff. They're kind of bound by this same pattern, and it's really a pattern of disconnection from perfection, actually, from the perfection of nature, and so we go looking for it in other places. But I kind of want to take some time now to unpack that. So, this motivation, this search for perfection is I think quite a natural thing. But it drives us mad when we don't find it, because we're looking in the wrong place for it, basically, that the perfection doesn't appear in amongst the manifestations. The Taoists call the manifestations the 10,000 things, or the myriad of things. But it's basically in amongst all the relative life events. Perfection doesn't exist there. Or if something really nice happens in that realm, in this kind of relative realm, that the relative realm is always subject to change. If it's born, it can die. If it's appeared, it can disappear. And really, that perfection, when we've got all our hopes in that, once I get perfect at a skill, or once I get perfect at a job, or the perfect amount of money, and then the perfection still isn't there and it disappears. Someone takes our money away, or we get injured, or we get older and can't do what we could do before. And then we're in real trouble, where we've kind of hung all the hopes of perfection on this thing that must change at some point. And we end up stuck in this kind of loop, searching for perfection that can't be found. And I think this really goes back, like I said, to the maybe the dawn of Western civilization. Who knows? But it definitely seems to be an aspect of the unconscious shared by almost every single person I've met. Um, and what this aspect does is it looks out on the world, and it looks at the stuff as it is, especially today, when everything's a bit insane and a bit crazy. And it looks at all of that, and it just says that's not good enough. The way it is right now is just absolutely not good enough, with this kind of undertone that if I was in charge, I would make it better than this. I would, somehow, with all the knowledge of the universe given to me, I would make a better world than the world that is before me now. Or I'd make that part of it better, or this part of it better, or, so on and so forth. It's this big argument with reality that we all tend to have, that reality as it stands is just simply not good enough. A very natural thing when we feel like we can't connect to the perfection of nature. And I think this really comes back to that lack of trust in nature too, that we all seem to be infected by, to some degree or another. That we trust this bit but not that bit. We don't really trust that the world's going in the right direction, so we better get in there and push it in the right direction and be responsible for it going in the right direction. Um, and this hidden part of our unconscious that's kind of perpetually projecting at the world that it's not good enough has this problem that it can discover itself. And when it discovers itself, what does it do? It says it's not good enough. It's not good enough. It shouldn't be there. It shouldn't exist, running around projecting at the world that the world isn't good enough. And, it just perpetuates itself by constantly projecting not good enough at itself. And of course, by doing this, it's a kind of never ending loop. Um, and The heart of all of this, I think, is the capacity to listen, which is also a skill falling away. How many people can truly listen in silence, listen and not move to try and manage or counter or change somehow what they have heard. And this is a very, very difficult skill for a modern human, I think, and something that can be practiced actually with time. And with that practice, we can start to connect back to the inherent perfection that exists in the world. And with connection to that inherent perfection, we can stop, looking at all the imperfect stuff and going, oh, it's not good enough. Um, and, settle down a whole lot. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of point out that the motivations here are really important. So, and this perfection projection gets tied up in those motivations, right? We see someone who can do a skill that we can't do, and they must have their life together. They must not be having problems like me. And so, if I just get good at that skill, I can be without problems like them. And it's just not true. That this just doesn't exist. You might change the set of problems you have from one set to another, but you can't really get rid of the problems. You can get rid of your resistance to the problems and you can learn to navigate the problems a whole lot more effectively. But this doesn't stop the problems appear, nor does it necessarily guarantee that your navigation is going to be perpetually perfect either, because you're always gonna slip up, you're always gonna make a mistake, you're gonna fall over at one point, and that's just natural. That's natural and normal for things to go a little bit awry before they right themselves. So even going back to that idea of, oh, a healthy person is someone who never gets sick, right? This is just the weirdest orientation ever from my perspective. It's this idea that we're meant to go and like never have our immune system challenged at all, never need to experience, repairing from an invasion of, virus or bacteria or whatever. It's like an army that's just never seen action. It's going to be hopeless. And you've got plenty of stories about that too, right? Like the War of the Worlds, the classic one where the aliens kind of show up here from Mars and start invading, but they've never had a bacterial infection. And so they just get all overrun by bacterial infections and they all die. Um, yeah, so the same idea here, that this projection of perfection, what what does health look like when that projection disappears? What does health mean to you if you can't become perfect? What kind of things would then be important to you? Okay, you can't become perfect. Um, you're probably going to get sick at some point in your life. You are definitely, definitely, definitely going to die at some point. That's for sure. You're going to die. So what do you want to do with the time that you have? What's the motivation for doing the stuff you're doing? Do you think that, if you do this, you'll finally get recognized, and in that recognition, you'll feel good about yourself, and finally you can, like yourself because the rest of society liked you or something like this? A lot of psychology wrapped up in here, and I really specifically am not trying to give you an answer here, right? The point is not to just be like, oh, by the way, here's the actual perfect answer, the that you guys all missed, and I had. It's not at all that. It's actually to point out the polar opposite, that none of this stuff will bring you perfection. I've in every single field I've studied, in every single one, I have met people who are at the top of that field and uh, you know, assholes of some kind. They're not very nice people. They're weird in their social life. They have strange belief structures. They get up to, probably get up to some sort of mischief of some sort. Some combination of that has just always been the case, or they've got a weird health problem that no matter all their training, they haven't been able to get on top of. Um, there's imperfections there, which is normal. It's very normal for all humans to be imperfect, even if they're really skilled at something. Even if they're super skilled, they're going to have their flaws. Some of those flaws in some people are going to be worse than others. or at least worse for you. Your value set may not agree with them. And so I'd really highly recommend that when you're starting to dig into your motivations, really start to look at the people you look up to as well. And do you consider them superior people to you? If you consider them superior people, then you might just want to take a step back. If you consider that they've got a better life than you, then maybe just reevaluate that for a second, because for everything they've got that you consider a boon that you don't have, they've got a bunch of problems that you don't have too, and maybe you can't see those problems and don't have to deal with them. And if you were given those problems, you'd be like, "Well, hell no, I'll go without the skills and without the problems as well. Thank you." I definitely felt like that a bunch of times when I saw some very high level people in their skill set with problems. I'm just like, I'd just rather not have that skill set and not have that set of problems to go with it. So, um, yeah, and this example, if you look at the problems that people have, can be extended all the way into the mythological characters, the heroes of our mythologies. When you've got something like, the Jesus story of this guy who was like the son of the whole universe, the son of God, um, born into enlightenment or whatever, into favor somehow, ended up getting crucified, which is not a particularly nice event for his troubles. And so, you know, even these mythological figures, and I think it's actually in the mythology on purpose that they have these problems, they have these issues that they have to face. They get upset, they do things wrong, they make mistakes. I think in the story of the Buddha, there's something similar, maybe not as dramatic as that, but there's a moment. Um, I can't remember exactly where I heard the story, but there's a moment in one of the Buddha stories, maybe in the Pali Canon or something somewhere, where basically he's trying to explain or teach his viewpoint, and people just aren't getting it at all, aren't getting the qualities he's pointing to, aren't understanding what he's trying to teach, and he's pretty much on the edge of giving up. He's just saying these people are all idiots and they don't get it at all, not one bit, and no amount of my teaching is going to help them get it. And a deity ends up intervening, going, "No, no, no, you need to keep teaching because it's necessary in the world, even if they're not getting it. You need to keep doing your thing." So even these like high level mythological characters um, have problems. And in these mythological stories, in these stories of like the cycles of the universe and the world, all of them have or at least a lot of them have this same idea of cycles, right? Things build up, and if they build up to a certain point, they'll reach a peak and then they'll start falling down. um, in the I Ching, the Book of Changes, you have this idea. I think it's the 63 hexagram is the perfection. It's the perfect hexagram. And if you look at this hexagram, it's just full of warnings, right? It's just sort of saying like, warning, warning, warning. You are at the top. The only place to go from the top is down. And so things are going to get worse now. And so even though it's a perfect hexagram, it's like it's actually not a great hexagram to draw for your predictions. It's kind of got a big warning involved that you're at the top and the only place to go is down. And there's a story by Joseph Campbell too that's very similar. That's talking about some guy who worked his way up through, ascended from the human realm up through the ranks and became like a deity, and then another deity, and then a high order deity, and I think he ends up as an Indra, which is a very high order deity, basically responsible for running most of the universe. And this Indra is building this castle, this palace, the likes of which the universe had never seen before, and he gets all these, kind of ants and whatever lower beings to build this palace up for him. And another deity comes past and goes, "Oh, look at what you're doing! Fantastic job! You're making this palace. It's so wonderful. It's so magnificent." Um, but all of those little workers down there, who do you think they are? And the guy's like, "Oh yeah, they're just the lower beings." And he goes, "They were all former Indras. They had all been in your position at one point, been at the top of everything, and then gone down again." So if you think there's this like climb through this ladder of skills where you'll just arrive at this point where suddenly everything will be amazing forever, think again. It doesn't exist. It's probably not going to arrive in at least your human lifetime. So, in the case that that's not going to happen, in the case that the pursuing of your skill set isn't going to lead to the resolution of all of your problems or even some of your problems, would you still do it? And here we can start to look at the motivation and the orientation towards what you're doing. Basically, I'm going to use a kind of yin yang framework here or fire and water kind of idea that we can have, broadly speaking, two main motivations. There is a motivation of, let's call it the heart of curiosity, of creativity, of discovery, the motivation that's aligned with the heart of the universe itself, that's just wanting to discover what comes next, which is a real curiosity, right? It's a real explorer's motivation. I'm just going to see what happens. I'm not hoping to find anything in particular, but I'm just so curious as to what's it like? What's it like to be good at that? Can I improve upon that? Not in a because it needs to, but because of the kind of wonderment of creativity. Then you've got opposing um the opposing motivation, which is a motivation of fear. This motivation basically kind of changes it that if I don't get that skill, then I'm not so worthwhile. I'm not going to be successful. Some kind of like I'm a terrible human if I don't get that skill, and so I better work really hard at it to not be a terrible human. And by the way, all those other people who don't have that skill that I've just worked really hard to get, they're all terrible people as well. So this motivation that comes from the fear of being, let's call it unworthy, the fear of being unworthy, so you work really, really, really hard to become worthy, to overcome that fear. And that motivation, that's the one we've got to be wary of. It's probably going to get all of us at one point in time, but um, it's really not a nice way to motivate yourself, if you ask me. It's really going to probably lead to some problems because no amount of skill in anything will make you worthy of anything. The thing that makes you feel worthy to exist is accepting the way you are and the way the world is in its imperfections. The the drive to improve it is never going to lead to worthiness. I don't think it's possible. Um, So yeah, maybe take those two things and chew on them, right? Are you engaging in what you're doing, your cultivation, your meditation practice, your movement practice, whatever, out of a kind of fear of not being enough? Or are you engaging with it out of a curiosity and a creativity, just like that beginner's mindset, that the wonderment of a child discovering the world. It's just like, whoa, we can do this. Oh wow, if I practice, I can do that too. That's really cool. Um, and in that mindset, it stops uh, projecting at the other people who don't do it because it doesn't have this worthiness bound up in it. Then when you see other people who don't do your thing, it's not a problem at all. They're probably exploring some other part, and even if they're not, there's some context about that. Um, but more interestingly, it means that if you're there pursuing your thing for the sake of discovery, then it's not really about getting to a destination. It's about how you, the old trope. It's about the journey before the destination. That it's about the discovery along the way. There's no point just arriving at the end. We kind of want to have those moments of that's really cool. Those moments of discovery, and basically there is so much stuff to discover in the world that you could never exhaust yourself of discovering new things. Like even if you get, I don't know, let's say really good at meditation and you have a big awakening moment and whatever else, you can still discover how to play music. You can still discover how to do any kind of activity. You can still discover all of the infinite things that exist in the world ready for discovery, and all the things that haven't been discovered by anyone too that might be discovered by you. That's also possible. So really see if you can. I'm not even going to say that you should do this. I'm just kind of going to throw it out there as a way for you to consider your orientation. So just to wrap that big rambling up, there's the aspect that I started with, that what does health, wellness, fitness, whatever cultivation mean to you? And to really get some clarity around which parts are important there. Do you want to be able to do certain activities? Do you want to be able to, have a bit less pain in the body, whatever? All of them are totally valid. But do you think that getting good at that stuff will make your life perfect? That's a big question that you can kind of explore a bit. And in line with that is that, like, can you perceive that or become aware of that aspect of yourself, that aspect that we all have, or all these modern humans, probably all the people listening to this, have that look on things and say not good enough as they are, they need to be improved. And can that aspect of yourself can you become aware of it without trying to also not good enough when you become aware of that part of the unconscious that doesn't find anything to be good enough, um, can you become aware of that without trying to resolve it? Because that's also totally fine as it is. And then to start to look at, what does motivate you? Are you motivated by fear, or are you motivated by curiosity? And just to consider all of that. And if you've discovered something interesting, I'd really invite you to, post a comment on this or send me an email about it, and let me know what you discovered and what was there. I'm sure there's some latently hidden unconscious fear motivation in me. I'm always suspicious that, however consciously curious I feel, that there's some sort of hidden fear driving it. But I really enjoy these days, more so than anything, is the curiosity aspect. This kind of discovery for the sake of discovery. And when people write in going, "Hey, yeah, I discovered this," that kind of, yeah, that's right up my alley. So if you feel like sharing something you discovered, or sharing how this kind of avenue of thought or orientation has helped you in any way, please write in. Please just send me a message or drop a comment on wherever you're listening to this on, and I'll do my best to write back or maybe address it in a future podcast. So I think I might wrap up this episode just there. It's always interesting to see where these go. That was a little bit rambly. I hope it made some sense to everyone. I am just doing these podcasts really, flying by the seat of my pants. I just sit down and I have a kind of vague idea of a topic and I start talking, and it just goes wherever it goes. But yeah, hoping to dig a little more deeper into maybe some of the more technical parts after this. But I really wanted to get that broad level orientation across. It's definitely something I use for myself, and I encourage in my students to always remember that, even if they get super good at all of the skills I'm teaching, that's not necessarily going to make their problems go away. Um, and yeah, it's hoping to dive into more. Yeah, probably the next episode, or one of the episodes in the near future, will really be about more of like the opening and the releasing process that's central to my work, and how to approach that. Even if you're not doing the specific things I'm doing, it can really work well in a lot of other stuff. And I'm also hoping to get some of my friends on the podcast to interview them and hear about the cool things they're doing. I've got a stack of friends who I was training really close with at one point, and we've kind of, our paths forked, and they've been doing whatever research they've been doing, which is probably super duper interesting that I personally want to hear about, and I think it will be really interesting for the listeners to hear about as well. So yeah, have a think about your motivation. I'm going to sign off now, and I'll be back in a little while with another episode, maybe an interview, or maybe another rambly theory episode like this one. In the meantime, I hope you enjoy yourself while you listen to this particular recording. And also, if you feel like supporting me, I've got a bunch of online courses and things like this over on my website. So you can find that all at www.craigmallet, that's CraigMallet.com, craigmallet.com. From there, you can find everything else. So have a poke around there if this is kind of tickling your fancy, and let me know what you think.